Good morning and welcome everyone. Welcome to those joining us online and welcome to those joining us here in Stockholm, where we meet on the lands of the Sami, the traditional peoples and the custodians of these lands. My name is Regina Suter. I'm from the International Water Centre at Griffith University in Australia, and we are one of the many partners in the Australian Government's Water for Women Fund. I'm really looking forward to hosting us through this session this morning, which I hope you will find gives you some food for thought and some ideas for practical steps that perhaps you might consider taking to improve the diversity of voices in the water and wash governance programs or systems that you're working in. We are going to explore this issue. Why are diverse voices critical? What do we mean by diverse voices? Whose voices are we talking about? What do we need to think about when we are considering taking steps to improve diversity? And how might we go about this? So first up, we will set the scene with our opening guest speaker. And then we're going to hear about two cases in which there's been some pretty careful thinking and action around this issue. And we're going to do that using an innovative riverside chat activity, just to mix things up here at the conference. And that will allow our guest speakers to really share their experiences and explore them a little bit with each other. Finally, we'll end with a panel and some audience discussion for a further opportunity to explore these issues. I will encourage you to ask many questions as we go along. There'll be plenty of opportunities to do that. And for those online, we have a moderator who'll pick up your questions from the chat box. We will be also looking for you to share your input through a couple of questions. I will apologise by saying we had planned to do these through Menti, but have learned this morning that's not actually possible. So we will be doing that spontaneously in the room through physically sharing our responses, and we'll ask you online to share through the chat box. Okay, so we will in fact start with a question. And this first question is, in the places that you're working, the countries that you're working in, or the parts of the countries that you're working in and the settings you're working in, the programs and the projects, how well do you think diverse voices are being considered in the water and wash knowledge bases and decision making? If you were to give a score out of 5 stars, how would you rate those programs and policies and settings that you're working in? So if you are online, we invite you to write your score in the chat box. We probably won't be able to skim through all of those, but we welcome your input. If you're here in the room and you think that your programs or context are scoring a 5 or maybe even a 4, please stand up. Okay. No one's standing for those online, so that's interesting and requires some pretty careful consideration. Anyone who would score their programs and projects or settings with a 3 stars? Great. Great, excellent. So for those online, that's not quite half of the room standing up. Thank you. And 3 online, great, thank you. And I won't assume the rest are 2 and 1. I will ask you to stand if you think your programs or projects are maybe a 2 or a 1 star. Great, thank you for sharing. It's not a reflection on you personally, it's about the places you work, so thank you for your honesty. So, obviously this session is relevant and important and timely, and hopefully will give us some food for thought on these issues. So, over to our opening speaker. It's a great honour for me to welcome Llewellyn Martin here this morning. Llewellyn works at the Australian Department of Climate Change, Energy, Environment and Water. And Llewellyn is a Kamilaroi, my apologies, woman, and one of Australia's many Indigenous mobs. Thank you, Llewellyn.
Thanks, Regina. Good morning, everyone. Good morning to those in the room, and good morning, afternoon, evening to those of you online. It's a pleasure to be able to make a few introductory remarks at this session this morning. As Regina said, I work for the Australian Government's Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water. As is our custom in Australia, I want to acknowledge the Sami people and their connection to their country, and I pay my respects to their elders and to their ancestors. The Australian Government is really pleased to be able to be a part of this session, which gives the platform to diverse voices from the Pacific and from Australia, so that Colin and Tema and Phil and Michelle can share their work and talk about the challenges they face and inspire all of us for positive change for climate resilience. I guess just to sort of add some context to the conversation, as we all know, SDG 6 on achieving clean water and sanitation for all is critical for the health, well-being and resilience of every individual, community and society. SDG 6 is a crucial cornerstone for equitable development outcomes across all the SDGs, including climate, environment, oceans, gender equality, education and sustainable resilient cities. And food security should be in that list as well, I think. And yet, according to the recent joint monitoring report, 2.2 billion people still lack safely managed drinking water, and 3.4 billion people lack safely managed sanitation. Oceania, in fact, has the lowest rates of basic drinking water and sanitation coverage in the world. And this is particularly confronting statistic when, as we know, climate change is well and truly with us now, and the wider Asia-Pacific region is exceptionally exposed to its impacts, regularly experiencing floods, cyclones, hurricanes, and droughts. The region is also home to many of the world's poorest and most vulnerable people. Climate change is escalating risks and exacerbating impacts, particularly for women and marginalised populations. So we need to work harder at valuing the voices, knowledge and capacities of women, of First Nations people and people from marginalised communities. They are critical in shaping locally led, sustainable solutions that can improve equitable access to clean water and sanitation and move towards a climate resilient future. Inclusive water and wash are critical for community resilience and the ability to adapt and respond to increasing climate hazards. But obviously, no one can do it alone. Locally led solutions need global support. And SDG 6 will not be achieved without a concerted effort by governments and all development partners. This month, the Australian Government released its new international development policy, the first in almost a decade, actually. And the policy will drive the government's development investments in tackling regional challenges, and its stated objective is for a peaceful, stable and prosperous Indo-Pacific. And this policy places the government's commitment to gender equality, to the rights of people with disabilities, the perspectives of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and climate change and locally led solutions at the heart of Australia's development program. And we recognise the importance of integrating all of these principles into our wash and water work as well. And so it's through support for programs like Water for Women and the Australian Water Partnership that we embed a strong gender equality and strong social inclusion approach to the projects that they do in the region. And at home as well, in Australia, we are working to do better at partnering with Aboriginal people to increase ownership of water and to take part in water policy decisions, and to improve how we value and apply traditional knowledge to climate change adaptation and mitigation. All works in progress, but all valuable work. So this session is an opportunity for us all to learn from women-led climate resilient programs in the Asia Pacific and identify key actionable solutions and tools for strengthening inclusive climate resilient water and wash systems. It's been really pleasing to hear this week the themes of diversity inclusion coming through so strongly in many of the sessions. And so in this session today, I'm really looking forward to the opportunity to kind of dive into that a little deeper and hear from water and wash practitioners from Australia and the Solomon Islands about their experiences and their ideas on effective tools and strategies for how we can really strengthen inclusion and participation. So on that note, I'll hand back to Regina. Thank you again, everyone.
Thank you, Llewellyn, that was great. Okay, so I have great pleasure now in welcoming Michelle and Phil to the stage. Michelle Hobbs, is a descendant of the Bidjara and Dunghutti peoples. She's a freshwater woman and aquatic ecologist and is Associate Lecturer at Griffith University, Australia. And Phil Duncan is a proud Gomeroi man and is the Galambany Professorial it's Thursday morning, I'm really tired, my apologies. Galambany Professorial Fellow at the University of Canberra. Michelle and Phil, if you wouldn't mind taking the stage. Phil, if you would mind taking a seat. Yeah, and we'll do questions after.
Yep, Thursday morning. Thanks everyone for coming out so early on the final day of the conference. It's fantastic to have you all here. I'd like to start by acknowledging the Sami people, the traditional custodians of the lands and the waters that we're on, and taking a leaf out of their book, acknowledging the waters of this place and giving the waters our thanks. I'd also like to acknowledge my own ancestors, Bidjara and Dunghutti. So I'm an aquatic ecologist rather than a wash specialist particularly, but I have worked in water quality policy and worked on water quality in an environmental consulting context as well. And now I'm working on ecological research that combines all of those things. So today I'm just going to share some insights from the different roles that I've had in my career, and also based on my lived experience as an Aboriginal woman scientist. So just to give you a bit of context, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in Australia are a really diverse group. We have more than 500 different language groups, and each of those language groups have different tribes within them, and they each have their own unique connections to the land and the waters that they live on. We have at least 65,000 years of occupation on the mainland of Australia. And I'm not sure what the length of occupation is in the Torres Strait, but it's at least 8,000 years, I think, something in that order of magnitude. So we have really strong cultural relationships with rivers, wetlands and groundwater. These waters literally shape the cultures that have developed in that place in response to the environmental conditions that are there. And likewise, the people that have been living there have also shaped the water systems that are there over many thousands of years. So despite this long history, in general in Australia, Indigenous knowledges about water are still not taken very seriously. They're thought of as fiction and stories and nice to know, but not necessarily useful in a water management context. But we don't believe that this is the case at all. And our advice is generally excluded from policy decisions, even those policies that are likely to affect Aboriginal peoples. In our cultures, water places have a lot of spiritual significance. There are a lot of stories associated with them, and there are a lot of important women's and men's places around water, which are separate. In our culture, men and women have separate responsibilities for caring for particular places and for looking after particular knowledge. And a lot of the water places are important women's places, and that means that the men can't speak for those places, in some cases they can't go to those places, and vice versa for the men's places. So today I'm mostly going to be speaking about Aboriginal women rather than Torres Strait Islander women, because I don't want to speak for them. But yes, we definitely acknowledge that they also have long and rich histories associated with freshwater. So Australian river catchments are hugely variable. They are actually one of the most hydrologically variable set of rivers in the world. They go through massive droughts and massive floods under normal conditions, and then we're finding that this has been absolutely exacerbated by climate change in the last few years. So the picture on the right there is the Balonne River in southern Queensland. It's the top of the Murray-Darling Basin, which is the largest river basin in Australia. And that's not particularly during drought, but just in a bit of a dry phase on the right. And then on the left is the same river in flood and going absolutely gangbusters a few years ago. So we have a really high climatic variation anyway, and then we also have a lot of very wet areas in the north and very dry areas in the centre and the south, but most of the country is very, very dry. So we're very reliant on rain for our fresh water and also groundwater in many places. We don't have any regular glacial melt that inputs water into our rivers. So yeah, it's a very, very hydrologically variable place. So we have because of that, we have a really strong cultural responsibility to our waterways and to looking after water quality. For each group, there is a real sense of pride in looking after river health and the water that flows downstream to the next tribe or mob that live downstream. If you're, able to look after the water quality and you've got clean water running down to your neighbours, then there's a real sense of pride and reciprocity and responsibility in that. Despite that, particularly I'm going to talk a bit about the Murray-Darling Basin because I've worked a lot in the Murray-Darling Basin. It's a basin that has highly, highly regulated flows. There's issues with over-allocation of water for irrigation and other industrial activities, but mostly irrigation. And there's been a process of trying to buy back water licences so that there is sufficient water for the environment. But often Aboriginal people miss out in this conversation. Even though we have some land rights, what we call native title in Australia, those land rights don't come with water. The water is managed completely separately to the land. And because of the way that things have panned out during colonisation, Aboriginal people were often not in a position to purchase water. And so a recent study has found that Aboriginal people in the Murray-Darling Basin own less than 0.1% of the water in the entire basin, which is a really concerning statistic. Okay, I'm going to jump to talking about all the stuff that I find really fun now. So Aboriginal women and fishing. Aboriginal women have a really strong history of being excellent fisherwomen, spending a lot of time in the water, with the kids and with family. Being able to do that is a really important time for what we call intergenerational transfer of knowledge. So when you're out on country, in the water, those stories and those memories come up. Oh yeah, my grandmother used to take me here, and that's a really important way for passing on knowledge from generation to generation. And it's also really important for social cohesion. It can also be a really important social security, I guess, type thing, catching fish or gathering mussels or crayfish and being able to share that with others in the community, like elders or other people who may not be able to get out there and do the fishing themselves. And that's also really important in a lot of rural communities where going to the supermarket is incredibly expensive and it's hard to get fresh stuff. So being able to do that is a really important part of life. So those words there at the top, gamu means water in my language. Winna means fish. Boogly is the crayfish at the top there. And Julani is the freshwater mussel, which is in the middle there. So one of the reasons it's important to have women involved in management of water is that women have their own way of being in and experiencing the landscape, which is always going to be different to how men do that. And I guess one of the reasons for that is because women are often there with children or with elderly family that they're looking after. I don't know, in my case, I'm not very tall, so I've always found that my experience working in and around rivers is completely different to working with, big men who are about 6 foot tall. There was one time where I was out doing field work with my boss, and he's like 6'3", and he just jumped in and went to walk across the river, but it was far too deep for me, so I started to float off downstream. So just that kind of thing, it really influences the places that women go around rivers, the places that are important to them, the places that are safe for them, and that's one of the reasons that it's important to have a diversity of opinions when we're talking about water management. And yes, and I also spoke earlier about women's knowledge of water places, women's specific places in Aboriginal culture. The men can't speak for them, so if you don't have women's voices in water management, you're potentially excluding, 50% of the knowledge that is out there on these places. So women have a lot of reasons for wanting to be involved in water management and catchment health. Women often still bear the brunt of domestic labour, even in Australia, even in 2023. They look after the children, and I've heard a lot of stories from the last drought about when the river does run dry. The kids have nothing to do, so the kids in the community get up to mischief, get into trouble. There are a lot of issues with unjust incarceration of youth in Australia. So these are real community issues that really affect women. Also, in the old days, women actually gave birth in the water some of the time. So having that cultural birthright, I suppose, to be able to do that, you need really good water quality to be able to do that. And in most cases, we just simply do not have access to that anymore. So women's roles in water and challenges in Australia. So I'm just going to give a bit of an update, I guess, on how we got to this point and where we're at now. So in addition to the usual sexist barriers that women have faced over the years, Aboriginal women in particular have been exceptionally marginalised and poorly treated. And this is a combination of racism and sexism. And it's not my area of expertise, so I won't go into too much detail about this. But I will just mention that our sister Rochelle from the Anishinaabe tribe in the upper Colorado River Basin in the USA, even though it's out of the Asia Pacific, she spoke about the disappearance of First Nations women in her community and how authorities still turn a blind eye to that happening, even though it happens on a regular basis. So those sorts of things are things that we've had to deal with over many years. In Australia, Aboriginal women face barriers to education, property ownership, just all the usual things that happen under the patriarchy. But these things continue to prevent Aboriginal women from participating in water management. Educating our women and having good support and facilitating the participation of Aboriginal women in education and going on to be in the workforce is such an important way of ensuring that Aboriginal women have got voices in water management. It's not enough just to engage Aboriginal communities. You also need to have people who are working in water management so that they have that power to have their say and be involved in decision making. Women's voices need to be better considered in water ownership and decision making. Yes, I would say that in the water industry, there are more and more Aboriginal people who are working in the water industry, but we're still an absolute minority, and the women within that, both men and women, are a minority of a minority. We do have a whole bunch of women who work as rangers right around Australia, and that's really important, having that on ground, physically caring for country type setup. So there are lots of really fantastic ranger women, and I've heard a lot of them present at scientific conferences in Australia, and it's really fantastic to see because they're still living in community, they're involved in the community, they're able to implement what community want to happen in their land management. Access to water continues to be a real issue for Aboriginal people in two different ways. First of all, physically accessing water places is an incredibly fraught thing in a lot of places in Australia. The way that property ownership works in Australia, a lot of large property owners are not prevented from fencing all the way along the river. Even though they don't own the river, they are able to fence right across the river or all the way along to keep their cattle in or out. And the effect that that has is that it's really difficult to access the river. Even though the river itself is Crown land and about 30 metres either side of the banks, it's very difficult to access those places. And I've also heard stories of people being chased with guns. I even heard of someone being shot one time in the Murray-Darling Basin. So it's quite difficult for Aboriginal people to physically get down to the river just to go fishing or just to visit their sacred place and see how it's faring or to have any kind of connection with it anymore. The other big access issue in relation to water is access to clean drinking water in remote communities. There are a lot of places in Australia where there is very little provision of water treatment, particularly in very remote communities. And then even in places that do normally have treatment of water, like small towns in remote places, when you have a massive drought like we had at the end of 2019, early 2020, a lot of communities ran out of water. And that showed up a lot of the inequity in, I guess, financial means for people living in those places. The water that was available was either bore water, which is very high in salts and very bad for your kidneys if you drink that over a long period of time, and very unpalatable in a lot of cases. A lot of the surface water that was being provided for drinking water had a terrible smell. It had blue-green algae in it, those sorts of things. But, you know, people that had more means could afford to ship in water from elsewhere. So those drought conditions that are going to be more of an issue under climate change are also a big issue for drinking water. So there's been a recent push for the engagement of Aboriginal peoples to ask for their knowledges, particularly when it comes to combating climate change. But it's important to acknowledge that asking people for their knowledge isn't always appropriate. Some of that information is secret. Some of it only makes sense when it's within a cultural context, and as soon as you take it out of that context, it loses a lot of its meaning. Some of it is difficult to share when you're not physically out on country. Some of it is best interpreted when you are out there. And a lot of that knowledge is actually a shared responsibility within a group. It doesn't belong to any one person. It often belongs to an entire group of people. So there are a lot of considerations when it comes to engaging with Aboriginal people. And in my opinion, the best way is always to find a way to facilitate Aboriginal people in being the decision makers over their own country, rather than just being asked their opinion. Okay, I might finish there, and then Phil and I can have a bit more of a chat over a couple of questions. So thank you very much.
Marabou. That was, you never cease to amaze me. I think it's a great concept, Regina, that we've got here, the Riverside chat, the Riverside yarn. I think it's also reflective of our desire for you to, not just meet with our yinners, that's our Gomeroi word for Aboriginal woman, or Indigenous people inside four walls. Sometimes the best conversations is on the riverbank, under that tree, listening to Gunama, our sacred Mother Earth, and our arteries that flow with us. I am so proud to be able to do this with you. So I've got a couple of questions that I'd like to pose to you about, particularly as a yinner and a yinner scientist. So can you share a bit about your lived experiences as a female Indigenous woman scientist. I know you gave us a little couple of vignettes inside that presentation, but what are some of your real lived experiences?
Thanks, Phil. Yeah, I feel like there's two parts to that. First of all, just being a woman in science has been very interesting. Things are changing really quickly. There are a lot more women working in science these days. But when I started my career back in 2006, I got out of university, and that we had heaps of women at university. It was 50-50, and then I got out into the workforce, and I was like, where are all the women? And I worked in environmental consulting, which involved a lot of field work and travel and going out into the bush. And it was all with men, which was interesting. Most of them were fantastic, but I had colleagues who suffered sexual harassment under such conditions, particularly when travelling abroad, which we do a lot for environmental consulting. So yeah, it's a challenge, absolutely. Even simple things like, what if I've got my period and I'm on field work and I'm going to be surrounded by men and there's not going to be any facilities? That happens all the time. And then when it comes to being an Aboriginal woman in that situation, well, not in that situation, but just in general, there is no space for being that person, really. Like, it's just completely ignored. I guess for me, working in consulting, for example, if I was working on an environmental impact assessment and we were going out on somebody's country to do field work, I would always feel like it would be the right cultural protocol to tell people where we're going and what we're doing and asking for permission. But there's just no framework, no precedent for doing that, or being able to do that. The only time that traditional owners would be with us on jobs is if there was cultural heritage. So if somebody had found artefacts, then we would have them with us. But most of the time, it's not at all considered.
Your honesty and the integrity of your answers, I hope people embrace that. We don't just talk or advise you and think about truth-telling. I know you live it. Look, it would be remiss of me not to also acknowledge that this year in NAIDOC Week, Michelle was named as part of the Cosmos magazine Australia as part of the top 50 Indigenous influencers in our country. So, please. Which makes me even more proud to be associated with you. I think the other question I want to ask is another open-ended question, and it's a part of this journey that we've been on here with Seaweed this week, about many of our Indigenous brothers and sisters, particularly our sisters, in these significant female focused forums, about working with the community. So could you please give us some of your sage advice based on your lived experience to give others wanting to engage with Aboriginal women, Indigenous women across many Indigenous communities?
Yeah, that's a great question. The first place my mind goes to is a project I was involved in recently, and I won't say which one it is, but great project involving Aboriginal communities along the whole length of a river and looking at cultural values and the cultural perception of the health of the river, as well as the scientific health of the river. Fantastic project. But I got there and all the Aboriginal people who were there were men. And I said, where are the women? And they said, they were busy, or they didn't want to camp, or we didn't have room for them, that kind of thing. And I was just astounded, like, how can you, like I said before, that is immediately excluding 50% of the knowledge that exists on the cultural health of that river. So that was quite disappointing. But I would say also that when you have projects which are really on ground, so a lot of catchment health projects are really on ground, whether it's revegetation or community infrastructure, it's really important to have community buy-in for those projects so that they feel a sense of ownership, so that they want to continue to care for the infrastructure, look after the plants or whatever it is. And if you haven't got women at the table, it's probably not going to be successful, because women are the backbone of the community. They tell everybody what to do. They have their finger on the pulse. They know what everybody's up to. So it's just so important to have those people at the table to really understand who's important in the community and how the community works.
Thank you, Marabu. Again, thank you. And, you know, it's wonderful to see your growth and, you know, the leadership shine through you for our Indigenous women, not just as a freshwater woman, but as an Indigenous woman. And I know that we have a young Indigenous poster winner prize in the room today from AWA, and I want to give a big call out to you and hope you're enjoying these experiences, not just from a professional, but particularly from a cultural perspective. So, Marabu, and thank you for coming. But have you got any questions for me you might want to ask me?
Oh, yeah, I do, yeah. I've got a couple of questions for you too. And this is, you know, definitely very off the cuff. So Phil, and thank you for all your really kind words and for your support of me over the years. I really appreciate that. But I wanted to ask you, from your perspective as an Aboriginal man, can you share your perspectives on how to involve women in water management? What's the best way to really involve women in water management?
I think I don't need to reaffirm my commitment to Indigenous women and women in general. I think everybody knows that I wear my heart on my sleeve and stand loud and proud for anyone, particularly our Indigenous women, who are probably the most marginalised in the world. But AWP, I think one of the standout projects that reinforced my mother's teachings to me and my grandmother's teachings to me was AWP afforded me the wonderful opportunity to work with a piece for the World Bank. And it was Cultural Voices. And it was in the Murray-Darling Basin. And after some time thinking and talking to my wife in particular, I mean, she's a saltwater woman, but using many mentors in my life as sounding boards to think how I could seize that opportunity and turn it into something that can influence the way we think. And when we had our inception meeting with AWP and the World Bank, I chose to talk to 3 women across the basin. The top, the middle, and the bottom. Arnie Esther Kirby, Barappa, Gunbow wetlands on the Dungala, that's the Murray River. I spoke with Cheryl Buchanan, Guamu, Kneebone. Thank you, Marabu. And I spoke to Cheryl Bloor and another woman from Menindee, Barkinji, that live on the Barker. And I sought advice on how I should go about it. As a man, we always, sometimes don't think deep enough about the cultural appropriate way in doing that. So I sought some sage advice, and I actually engaged a woman to do the interviewing for me, and I sat on the sideline. And the conversations and the information was just wonderful to watch unfold. And I think I was very, very privileged to have that opportunity to learn from those women. The content of that, it's now a publication, by the way, if those that want to access the AWP website, and I'll always be grateful for that. Catherine, if you could take those messages back, and Michael, it was a wonderful opportunity because it has influenced. But it's certainly around protecting, and valuing that knowledge. It was very personal, it got emotional at times. They talked about how they are marginalised, the lateral violence and the bullying and the intimidation they experienced when they wanted to table their thoughts and their knowledge. And it just reaffirmed what you've been saying in your presentation, that a lot of our freshwater knowledge belongs to our yinners, our birthing chambers, our birthing sites, our education comes from our yinners. So that I think that if I could pull out one thing in the last 10 years in particular, that opportunity through AWP was profoundly impacting on me, and I truly hope that I've learnt and demonstrated my learnings from that to continue to be a stronger voice as a man for our yinners.
Thank you, Phil. Yeah, it's so important that we have our men champions that make space for us and support us in what we want to do. So the other thing that I wanted to ask you, sort of flowing on from that, is you often hear, how can we help you protect these places if we don't know why they're important, if we don't know why they're sacred? How can we walk with you on this when you won't give us the knowledge? And I wanted to ask you that sort of when it comes to supporting women and women's knowledge about water places, how can you do that without having to take over for them?
Look, I'm not unique, but I have I've learned to have, and I wasn't good at this as a young man, but I've learned by listening. Sometimes the best form of communication is just to shut up and listen to our yinners. And we as men need to realise that for a holistic approach to harvesting our cultural knowledge, our yinners need to be at the forefront of that. They need to be with us. They should never be an afterthought, because that knowledge, once it's harvested and interwoven into, and the opportunities to interweave it into future planning, management, modelling and engagement, I believe that's... But one of the key things I believe we need to take to the next level is creating safe environments where our women can have the courageous conversations, and make sure that that is a really safe environment, that they know that they are valued, that we are including them, and that we are walking with them, not for them. I think the whole language has got to change about how we do that. And this week alone, I think that together, you and I have listened to the likes of Erina, Tema, Malika, Sang, and other Indigenous women from our Asian Pacific network. That the generosity of spirit, but the stories of their struggle in their own environments, in their country, in their communities, about the trials and tribulations to have their voices heard. So in a nutshell, I hope that that's influenced not just the audience in the room and Marabou for joining us, but those online. And I hope it's a message that can cascade out across the globe, not just through Water for Women.
Thanks, Phil. Yeah, I totally echo that. I totally agree. And it's just so important that women are given the opportunity to be involved in the decision making and not just be an afterthought and not just provide information that might be inputted into decision making, but to really have that advocacy and being at the table in negotiating and making decisions about what happens to our waters on country.
Thanks to both of you very much for really sharing a lot from your experiences and your personal opinions. We really greatly value that. I'd like to open the floor to some questions. If there's anyone in the room with a question, please raise your hand. There's a microphone around the back there, I think Jose has. And Zara, I might ask you if there's any questions from online. Any questions?
Is it on? Yeah. Hi, thank you so much for that. It was really wonderful to listen to your conversation. I live in Brisbane, but I'm not Australian. I'm from the United States, and so I've had, I guess, this perspective of learning about how Australia works as opposed to being born with it. And there's this constant tension, right, between the parliamentary system that we have in place and then the rich Indigenous knowledge that's in place. And I guess if you could change things, or if you could wave a magic wand to create a system, what would you want it to look like? That was not, so it wasn't attention, but it was however you would want to perceive it. I don't want to put words in your mouth. Yeah, I don't know if that's articulate, but.
Thank you. That's a great question. Wish I had a magic wand. That'd be good. First of all, I think I would change the constitution so that Aboriginal people had a voice. And then I think I would wipe all of the existing legislation relating to land and water management and write just one document that was really simple, that treated everything as one holistic system, that treated rivers like they had a spirit and a being, and rather than separating water from the land and managing them all separately, managing them all together, including often when water is managed, it's managed in terms of water quantity, and then there are completely separate documents that manage water quality, which ignores the way that those two things are inherently linked. So I would just start again and write one document that put everything together. What about you, Phil?
Oh, I think you've answered. Look, the only value that I would add to that, and sorry, Llewellyn, you're in the room, but women's leadership. And yes, from an Aboriginal, Indigenous perspective, must be always in the forefront of our minds, and having that opportunity, but it should be women in general, more of a leadership role, not having the crumbs off the table, but sitting at the table as equals. That's the thing that I want to be, I hope I am a champion of and continue to be. That's the only great answer.
Thanks, Phil. One more thing I would change is every piece of legislation that we have relating to environmental decisions, the Minister has the power to just swan in and override all the environmental impact assessments, all the community consultation, and go, oh no, we're going to do this anyway. So I would change that so that there is more checks and balances, more responsibility given to those processes, so it's a community decision, not just a political decision.
Awesome, thank you, Michelle. Yeah, what's the point of consultation if it's just going to be sidelined? Great. Zara, any questions from online, or Jose?
Yeah, we have a question about climate change, Australia being at the forefront of a lot of the bigger droughts and bushfires that we've seen over the past years. What in particular does Indigenous knowledge and skills add, in your perspective, to increased disasters? And what are your, sort of a two-pronged question we have here, what are your main concerns over the next coming decades?
Great question, and you might have saw that I asked permission if I could. So demonstrating that asking is good. I want to reflect back to a bit of knowledge that I was gifted, not just by the old people, but particularly by scientists. In 1101 in Australia, we had a 30-year drought. 30-year drought. And to me, that is tangible evidence that we as Indigenous people in Australia have existed on the driest inhabitant on this continent, on this planet. The cultural way of life, the cultural methodologies of the way we've interacted with country to survive those events. And yes, climate change is at the forefront. I want to acknowledge that in 1947, the Saibai Island people of the Torres Strait Islands were the first climate change refugees in our country. The rising salt waters drowned out their freshwater supplies. And then the Bamaga, Injinu and Umagico people of Cape York Peninsula embraced the opportunity and saw the struggles and signed an agreement where the Saibai now take up residence at a place called Seisha. So we have had the ability to be mobile and adaptable to the changing landscapes, the rising seas, the shifting sands, and the changing flow regimes in our arteries and our anabranches. So again, I want to come back to this, harvesting that knowledge. I truly believe it is a missing ingredient, but when you harvest that knowledge, it's got to be from a holistic perspective, not just listening to us men, it's got to be from a whole of community. And a lot of the time, that should be led by our units. So I hope that answers the question for the online, because I think it was a good one. I believe you will add value.
Thanks, Phil. Absolutely. In terms of the fires that we had, what do we call it? The Black Summer, 2019, 2020, which was absolutely terrifying for everybody. Even where I live in Queensland, we don't usually get bad fires, but we had terrible, terrible fires, even in the rainforest, which is pretty unheard of. But what's come out of some of that, particularly further down south, is that there's some really good scientific evidence that has emerged that forests that have never been logged fared so much better in the fires than forests that had been logged at some point, even if there was lots of regrowth, even if it was 30, 40 years ago. Forests that had been logged were really susceptible to those fires that just spread through the canopy, and those fires that are just absolutely unstoppable. So I think that's really important information that we shouldn't disregard. And there's been a big push on what's called cultural burning in Australia. So Aboriginal people have always burnt the country, but in a particular way, to do it safely and to do it really gently. So it's called a cool burn. So you can do it in bare feet. It's not out of control. It's not dangerous. You do it under the right environmental conditions, like after rain, when there's enough soil moisture. And it just fixes nitrogen in the soil. It gently reduces some of the leaf litter and stuff that's on the ground, and it opens up the canopy underneath so that it promotes the right balance of species in the understory of the forest. And it's a real community activity. Women are there, men are there, the kids are there. It's an all-in type thing.
Sorry, I needed to add, it's a good point. It brings back memories. My wife and I got caught in that firestorm on her country, Yuin Walbunja country, and we were trapped. We were trapped for 7 days. And but after the trauma of that, and we revisit and invest in those communities, because that's what we do, we give back, to see the ranges that you mentioned in that part of my wife's cultural footprint, being involved in repairing country, doing the cultural burning, as you mentioned. Yeah, it was quite a traumatic experience. Sorry.
Thank you.
I was just going to talk about water briefly. And to get back to water in terms of climate resilience, it's just so important to start from a place of healthy rivers and healthy catchments as your starting point, before climate change accelerates. And I think that's what Indigenous people can bring to the table, is that we will always try and put the health of country and the water first, above economic development, above everything else, because that's the most important thing.
Awesome, thank you. Some awesome final words. Thank you, Phil and Michelle, really greatly appreciate it. I know there was a few more questions, and we're going to have a panel at the end, and that would be a good time to ask those follow-up questions, so thank you. Thank you. All right, I'm now greatly honoured to invite Tema and Colin to the stage, or perhaps Tema, Colin, would you like to sit there to watch? Great, thank you. Thanks, Phil, for role modelling that one. Now, Tema Wickham is a Solomon Islander woman from the Western Province. Tema's also the WASH Project Manager for Plan International Pacific in the Solomon Islands, and she's managing a large WASH program under the Water for Women Fund, and I've had the great honour to work with Tema over many, many years. And Colin Benjamin is a Solomon Islander man also from the Western Province, and Colin is a lecturer and researcher at the Solomon Islands National University, and he's been involved in Water for Women research since 2018. Welcome, Tema. Oh.
So, hello, Olgeta. Thank you very much, Regina, for the introduction, and good morning, everyone. So for my presentation, I will share an approach that we used in the Solomon Islands, and we took that approach to improve gender equality and social inclusion in community WASH management. So just to give a bit of a context, so I have a map here in front. If you can see, Solomon Islands is a very tiny country. We are one of many Pacific Island countries that face unique challenges in achieving water security for all. The population of the country is just more than 600,000 people. 80% of the population live in rural and remote communities. So these communities are accessible by vehicle, but as well as most of them are accessible by banana boats. And only 35 to 40% of these rural communities have access to drinking water. And in terms of sanitation, as you can see, 58% of the rural population still practice open defecation. So this is one of the major problems that we face in the country as well. So in rural communities, they use shared water systems, and the water services are managed by the community. So communities have responsibility for planning and managing their water systems, but with very limited support from external factors. So external factors such as the provincial government and the national government, as well as other stakeholders. So who is involved in managing water systems, and more importantly, who is not involved? So the WASH committees are usually formed to manage, operate, and maintain water systems, and also to promote sanitation and hygiene. But there is lack of diversity in water committee groups. So that's in terms of age and gender. So it's usually male-dominated, usually older. There's only 1 or 2 tribes that are represented, and these members have multiple responsibilities. For example, they have responsibilities in church, in school, in clinics. So this makes it even more challenging for them to allocate time and resources to the water management activities. So who is not represented? Obviously, in the context of Solomon Islands, women, youth, people with disabilities are not being involved. And also in some of the communities, those who live further at the edges of the villages are sometimes not involved or represented as well. So there's poor representation to amplify these like women, youth, and people with disabilities, their voices and concerns in the water committees. Also, when it comes to planning and decision-making, the water committees generally are inactive. So there's only one person that is often an active member, and it's not sustainable. So there's also not much effective engagement between the water committee and the community members. So there's no community feedback, and that channel is not strengthened, within that approach. So there's limited support given to the WASH committee as well. So through the collaboration and partnership between Plan International Solomon Islands and Australia, International Water Centre, the Solomon Islands National University, and Live and Learn Environmental Education in Solomon Islands, we all partnered together to develop and implement the community-based water security improvement planning. So this is based on water safety planning principles, where it is used to improve current risk-based planning and management of water quality, not only quality, but the quantity of it as well. So the goal of having a village scale or community scale improvement planning is to get water users and managers in the villages to think about the key risks that they experience in their local water security. And it is designed to build on strengths of the culture. So we don't go in to introduce something new, but we just build on what is already existing in the community. So now the strategy is to improve social inclusion. It is done at the zone level, and it is a very participatory approach. So you will see in the photos there we have a mix of women, young people who participated. There's also the opportunity to share and present, the ideas between everybody in the community. So the process involves local communities in planning, designing and executing water and wash projects, and also their own improvement plans. So by doing that, it is easier for diverse voices to be heard at the zone level. So working in smaller groups is effective in these communities due to strong kinship and family ties, so everybody knows each other, they understand the problem within their own zone levels. Also, water committee or the stewardship group, they hear more diverse perspectives from everybody. They hear more on what are the current problems are and what are also the possible ideas or solutions that they need to address. And also better communication and dissemination across community is also increased here, so the agreed actions are shared across everybody. And in that approach, it is easier to mobilize the actions at the zone level. So this quote is from one female in the community that we worked in. I'll just put it up for a few seconds, if you can just take a few moments to read. So to summarize, planning activities at the social levels within the community. So this approach encourages engagement of diverse stakeholders and voices. It instills collective action at zone level. It also gathers ideas from different groups, including women and youth. So they are also involved in prioritization of the issues and also part of the progressing the actions. And like I've mentioned, it makes it easier and more easier for the community members to actively, contribute the ideas towards the action plans. And I think finally the process works to, achieve social inclusion, and more importantly, it also, works towards leaving no one behind. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tema. I think there's a wonderful presentation from you, and I believe the audience must have liked that also. And they must have some questions and comments on the presentation as well. But that's good. You feeling okay? Thank you. Okay, just to balance it, Tema, you've been mentioning about this approach, stewardship, and then we heard about this approach, zone level approach, might be quite new to some of you in this audience. Maybe it's different compared to our context in the Solomon Islands. So just to balance it, you've been talking good things more about this approach. So can you, and maybe in your experience when you go to the communities with this approach, do you have any, maybe one challenge you observe or face when working in the communities with this approach? Thank you.
Thank you, Colin, for your question. So we use these zone levels, which is effective. Like I've shared, there are benefits of it, but one of the challenges that we faced is in the communities, there are different zones that has different sizes. So in some of the communities, the size of the zone level, it includes those who live at the coastal areas and also further inland. So it's different from other zones where they have smaller zones where it's easier for them to, work between themselves. So in the case of those large zone areas, they do have, different water problems. Those at the coastal areas, they have different water problems from those who are further inland. So sometimes that's not, fully considered by the water representatives. So what we do is we encourage the water committee representative from that committee, that zone level, to make sure that he visits or she visits everybody in that zone each households and consult with them. So getting the ideas from both those who live at the coastal areas and also those who live further up inland. Yeah, thanks, Colin.
Thank you so much. So you heard about that. We have zones in communities in the Solomon Islands. So we have more than 2-3 zones like that. So if you come to Solomon Islands, you'll select which zone you want to stay in the community. Yes. Yeah, nice. So those zones, they have sizes. Some are big, some are small. You can choose whatever size you want. Thank you, Tema.
Okay, Colin, so I'd also like to ask you a question. From your perspective, you've also used this approach in the community. So please, can you just share another challenge from your perspective?
Yeah, thank you very much. So I've been to almost 30 communities, rural-based in the Solomon Islands. I'm working in Guadalcanal Province and Western Province, Isabel Province. And yeah, there's some challenges I face, but not on most communities. But one kind of challenge I see in the community, and maybe it's not really happening in other communities, is like that. It's to do with the water system structure. So like this must be the stated design, but like there is only one main pipe from the dam, storage tank, and across to the zones in the communities. It's a bit risky with this design because when one part of the community, that particular zone, when someone in that zone get upset, they can just cut that pipe off, and then all other zones will not access water. Yeah, so bit risky with this design. So I think I would be tempted to say this, that there should be separate main pipes from storage tank or dam and storage tank to each zones. But then I would not suggest that, because using one main pipe is a good way to interconnect and for the community to have the sense that they are responsible for that one main water system. Yeah, so we are not trying to separate the community. We are trying to divide the community by having different components of water system to each zones like that. So having this one pipe is one good thing to link those zones, because we're not trying to promote working through zone level and separate them. They might have conflict there, but we are trying to broaden the participation so that it will be more wide like that. So it comes back to the community-wide participation. Thank you.
That's very good to hear that, you don't want to separate or raise conflicts in the community. So just while on that, I would also like to ask if you can share some of the strengths of this approach.
Yeah, I do. There's some strengths I found with this zone level approach, and it's very good. I think you have also mentioned in your presentation, and I want to emphasize on that also. One good thing about this zone level approach is it makes community participation more broader and inclusive. Yeah, but then in our research we also found out that when we collect water community attributes, when we look at the zone level representation in the water community, while we are emphasizing much on including women, including youth, and marginalized people in the community to be part of the decision-making process around water management. By looking at the water community attributes data, we found out that most of these women and youths, they are only represented in one side of the community. It doesn't represent all zones in the community. Yeah, so it's good that when we emphasize much on social inclusion, we have to also consider the zone representation in the community as well. Yeah, so and the other good thing about this zone level approach is that it creates opportunity for leadership, for new leaders. Yeah, so when we have reps from each zone, we are building opportunities for new leaders. And when you become a leader of the community, you have this agency, you have this call, you have this inspiration, you have to do something because people are watching you. Yeah, and it's very important. Yeah, they have this responsibility to do that also. Thank you. And also with the zone level approach, it's like implementation part of the action plan is very easy in the smaller context than a wider context like that. That's more cooperation in that level. Thank you.
So I just have a final follow-up question, Collins. It's in regards to the applicability of that approach. How do you see it? How transferable is this approach in other communities in Solomon Islands?
Okay, so we have emphasized much on the communities that have zones, but there are quite few communities that they don't have zones, but these are very small community, yeah. So if those communities that don't have zones, don't create new zones, yeah, you just go and just walk through their tribal system, because those communities that have a zones, like one tribe stays in that community, so just walk along the grid, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Colin.
Thank you,
Back
Colin
to you,
and
Regina.
Tema. Thank you. Really, really great to hear you talk about an approach that was really building on existing structures, zones of things that existed in communities. You're working with those levels of social solidarity and cohesion and building on those and trying to make them work as best you can. So thank you. I am going to invite you back to the stage. Sorry, I didn't see you slip away behind me there. And I'm going to invite everybody up, all of our panellists. So if you can, thank you, Phil. Awesome. And Llewellyn, maybe you'd like to also join. We're going to open up to questions from the audience. But I will start with the first question, just to get you going. And Llewellyn may also have some questions for participants. I'm going to, here we go. Is this going to work? I'm sure the tech man up the back's horrified at what we're doing right now. Yes, he's very much horrified. Well, good. You can share this perhaps between you, but maybe just the first question, and any of you are welcome to respond to this. But we heard, obviously, Phil and Michelle talk a lot about women and the real importance of involving women so that their knowledge can be represented, not necessarily asking them or requiring them to share that knowledge, but at least to represent that knowledge base. And we heard from Colin and Tema about an approach which is a bit more agnostic. It wasn't targeting women, it wasn't targeting youth, it wasn't targeting a particular marginalised voice. And I wondered whether any of you would like to respond to that, so maybe the pros and cons of either targeting approaches that maybe target marginalised voices compared with approaches that are maybe designed to try to surface marginalised voices without even perhaps knowing who they are. Would anyone like to make any comments about that?
I guess it really depends on the context. In an Australian context, I have found that it works quite well to have quotas, and from the outset of a project to say we want to have 50-50 men and women, or we want to have mostly Indigenous people, or having those targets at the outset is really successful in having those marginalised voices heard by doing it really deliberately. But I don't know if you think the same would work in your country.
So for in Solomon Islands, I also, it's dependent on the context. When we consult the communities, we make sure that we really understand, who is in the community, who are we consulting, and we usually give the opportunity to consult women sometimes separately, just because we want to give them a safe space to share their ideas. And sometimes we also have a separate conversation with the men and the youths, but we always want to encourage, everybody to be present together while we have these conversations at certain instances, rather than having separate groups. But it's very, like you said, it's very dependent also on the context and what really we want to get out of our participants. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I know I threw that question on you without much warning, so I appreciate your responses. Yes, Phil.
In Australia, our cultural, our society, we have men's and women's business. So you have to have deliberate, focused conversations. it's cultural protocols. It's culturally appropriate to do so. And don't be surprised about the wonderful content and knowledge that comes from those processes, but we need to adhere to cultural protocols, protecting the cultural intellectual property of our women, of our communities, but please understand that it has to be deliberate, particularly in Australian cultural context, given that we have women's and men's business that is significantly different. Sorry, that's just, I know it's a bit forthright, but that's the way we do business in Australia.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, just want to add on. So when we're trying to involve women and youth in the water committee, we need to also look beyond that in terms of representation. And we also mentioned about zone level representation, that's one of it. But the other one is where those women come from church. They need to include church representation inside school. We need to include church, school, from any leadership committee. We need to include that also. So it's not only that we include women and then somehow we pick all women from the household level. That's still not really, that should limit the representation of different groups in the community. So when you talk about inclusive, we need to look beyond that. Just picking up women and youth. We need to look at the background, where they come from, so that all the parts in the community are involved in decision making. Thank you.
Excellent point. Thank you, Colin. Okay, well, Llewellyn, you would like to respond? No? Okay, let's open to the audience for any questions. Please raise your hand. I think the microphone is still here somewhere. Yes, thanks, Jose.
My question is for Tema and Colin. With the Solomon Islands being incredibly vulnerable to sea level rise, and you touched on a little bit the differences in sort of coastal communities where you're working in more inland communities. Just curious how so the impacts of sea level rise and on wash activities, particularly water sources, factors into your discussions, your planning with the communities, and do you think zone level sort of jurisdiction, for lack of a better word, allows for more sort of like planned retreat? Just curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Okay, so in terms of climate change, what we also found working at zone levels is in different zones, the impacts are different, even though they're in one community, but it's very different from the zone living at the edge of the community or that zone living in the middle. For some of the zones, they do have access to hand dug wells. Some of the zones, they have their hand dug wells further just along the coast. So in terms of climate change impacts, sea level rise, it really does affect the water quality of that particular zone compared to another zone maybe further down in the community. So the impacts of climate change at the zone level is different for everybody, and that's why when we work at the zone levels, we have that opportunity to really understand the different impacts at the zone levels, but also for others to really understand that, that's the other zone right there is also experiencing, the hand dug well is becoming more and more saline compared to us. So how can we support them? Or how can we also make sure that our actions are working towards everybody having equal access to safe water for their all uses? Thank you.
So big impact, zero rise to our water system in the community. All our galvanized pipes are rusted, and then our wells mixed with salt water, and they couldn't drink those wells now. And when they use that for shower, it's like they feel itchy, something like that. And it's big impact to our water system. So I think the easy way they can do that is that we need to make them look back in the past, like how their forefathers have able to produce a good water system in the past by looking at the traditional knowledge system like that, because before, like, they always preserve the trees and they have bylaws in the community that protect them, and they have to pick up some of the good strengths from the past to use it for the action plan today so that they can able to address the future climate risk. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. Okay, maybe one more from the audience. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you. Michael Wilson from the Australian Water Partnership. I think my question is to Tima and Michelle. You're both driving change in your respective practices working in water. Can you reflect a little bit on how and whether the advice that you're now giving to younger women coming up behind you is different from the advice that you got from the women who've walked before you?
Thank you for that question. Tricky one for me, but yeah, so I think the advice I've received, I think it's important for me to not forget the advice that I've received from those who are already, before me, from my grandmother, and but also understanding that we are living in a changing environment. So whatever the advices that I get now, I look at it as a way that how can I use it to help those younger ones before me? So I think a combination of the wisdom and knowledge from my elders, as well as what I've been taught currently, I think a combination of that will really support the younger generations to not only think that the knowledge now is what we should be looking at, but there's also the value and the importance of preserving and keeping our knowledge that has been shared to us by our grandmothers and our mothers before us. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a cracker of a question. It's really quite hard to answer, I think. And I think about my mother and grandmother, and their life experience was just so completely different to mine. I was the first woman to go to university in our family, like in our immediate family. And I think a lot of the advice I would have gotten from other professionals would have been along the lines of watch your back, make sure you look after yourself. Whereas I think I would say to other young women, there's a whole community of us here now, and don't be afraid to be in a room full of men and say what you really think.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to give Llewellyn the honour of just a few final wrap-up words. I'll put up our kind of key messages as we start to move towards the end. But thank you all so very much for joining us today. We really have learned a lot from you, and really appreciate your willingness to share your quite personal experiences. Thank you. Llewellyn, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity just to say a few final remarks. And I think the first thing I want to say as an Aboriginal woman is just to thank you, Michelle, for speaking your truth today. It's really important, and I'm really pleased that we have you as a wonderful freshwater woman and a wonderful advocate for our people in water. So thank you so much. And and as a representative of the Australian government, I want to say to you also, I'm listening and I hear you. And if there's colleagues of mine from Canberra on the line, I hope you're listening too, because the Australian government has made a commitment to elevating First Nations voices in water, and we need to be listening up. So yeah, that's something for all of us there. And yeah, I guess just sort of reflecting on what, what's been shared here, I think it's clear how easy it would be to miss out and to overlook women's needs and women's perspectives in water and in WASH. Tema and Michelle sort of shared instances of, in both formal institutions, but in also kind of processes around when you, Michelle, had to do your sort of visit to the river and you were the only woman, or no women showed up. I mean, it's just easy to see how that happens in different contexts and in different situations. And so I think for people who are designing programs and policies and making decisions about water, I think we really need to keep that in mind, be aware of the barriers that women might face to participation because of their various roles in the communities, be mindful of the cultural protocols that should be followed if we want to be able to access women's knowledge appropriately, and yeah, be really intentional about how we'll seek to bring women's perspectives into our work from the outset. So I'll leave it there. I'll pass back to you, Regina, to close. You're not going to close? Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining us today.